Hello and welcome to a bit of an odd review because I'm taking a look at two games, Secret Agent and Crystal Caves, both for DOS. These are both platformers developed by Apogee, the first of which, Crystal Caves, was released in 1991 and Secret Agent was released in 1992. And the reason I'm including them both in the same review is because they're almost identical in terms of gameplay. In fact, they're so close to one another that I would say whether you play one or the other is really a matter of personal preference. Do you like the James Bond style theme, or do you like the theme of a guy going up into space to mine crystals? Because that's really the primary difference between the two. Now, it is worth noting that these things were widely circulated in the shareware scene, and that's how most people even know about them. And in fact, that's how I came to know them back in the day, so it definitely did its job. The problem being that I never really justified buying the full game because I was never really big into platformers to begin with. And then 3D Realms released the 3D Realms Anthology, so I actually got access to both of these games in their full releases. So let's go ahead and delve into this thing and find out how they hold up after all these years. Well, as far as presentation goes, they're both very comparable. They're both running on EGA graphics, the main difference being that one of them is sci-fi and the other one is more styled after spy movies. They're both working with pretty much the same color palettes, the same kind of sprite art, although you will find that the sprite art in Crystal Caves is slightly more detailed. I'm not entirely sure why, considering that Crystal Caves came out before Secret Agent, but the movement cycles and such in Secret Agent are considerably less detailed than they are in Crystal Caves. I mean, you can very easily see that the movement cycles are pretty smooth and fluid in Crystal Caves, whereas they look much more like, say, an 8-bit game in Secret Agent. Now, I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but it does mean that Crystal Caves is generally a better looking game than Secret Agent is, even though it came out earlier. On the other hand, you won't notice really any difference between Secret Agent and Crystal Caves in terms of the sound design because they both use PC speaker and they only use it for basic sound effects. You have sounds for when you jump, you have sounds for when you take damage, you have sounds for when you pick something up, and you have sounds for when you shoot at something. That's pretty much it. There's no soundtrack at all in these things, nor is there any voice acting, so it's entirely up to those sound effects to bring up the sound design, and it's definitely pretty lacking when you get down to it. Granted, fully dedicated sound cards really weren't much of a thing until the mid-90s. They existed at the time, but they weren't really very commonplace, so it makes sense that they didn't really gear it up towards that. Of course, it is a shame that there is no music in these things, because then you're just listening to the sounds of jumping around and shooting at things, and it's really not very satisfying when you get down to it. But of course, what you really care about in an old-school platformer like this isn't going to be the presentation. It's really going to be the story and the gameplay. Although there's really not much in the way of storyline for either of these games. Both games are split up into 3 different episodes, the first of which is released as shareware for both games. In Crystal Caves, the episodes are called volumes. In Secret Agent, they're called missions. But either way, you're dealing with the same overarching story for each game. The story in Crystal Caves is you play as Milo Steamwitz, and he has decided to fly out into the Altarian system in order to mine crystals. And the reason he's trying to mine crystals is so he can get enough cash in order to afford to buy a Twibble farm. What are Twibbles, I hear you asking? I don't know, and you're not really supposed to know. They're just some MacGuffin that you're trying to work toward, and the entire thing is just collect all the crystals in a level and then exit the level. There's obviously more to it than that, but I'll get to that more when I get to the gameplay section here. As far as the story of Secret Agent goes, you are Agent 006. So clever, right? Anyway, your whole thing is that you are trying to work against the evil organization DVS and stop them from developing and unleashing a super weapon called the Red Rock Rover. And to that end, it doesn't really do much of anything in terms of story throughout the game. Instead, you're just going from level to level, destroying the radar dish within the level, and then exiting the level. So you're noticing a pattern here. Both of these games are not remotely strong in terms of storyline. They're really more of an excuse for the gameplay. And that's ultimately going to be the deciding factor for you here, because both games play almost the same. The main difference is that in Crystal Caves, your objective in every single level is to collect all of the crystals and then make it to the exit alive. In Secret Agent, your objective is to destroy the radar dish and then get to the exit alive, and of course you also have to get dynamite in order to be able to blast the exit open. Both games control pretty much the same. You just move around and you jump, and there's also a button to shoot at things. In both games, you have a limited ammunition supply, which is replenished in Secret Agent by collecting bullets, and in Crystal Caves by collecting the guns scattered throughout the levels. And it may take multiple hits in order to take an enemy down, so you do need to be very aware of what you're shooting at and not waste your ammo. Each enemy type has its own move patterns, although in Secret Agent that mostly involves moving left or right, either on the ceiling or on the floor, and not really anything else. Although you do get a bit more variety than that in Crystal Caves, so with one particular enemy that just will go around in a fairly random pattern and makes it pretty irritating to deal with. And when an enemy either runs into you or hits you with an attack, you take a point of damage. You can take up to 3 points of damage before you have to restart the entire level. In both games, you only have those 3 health points in each level, but you do get infinite lives, and you can restart the level as many times as you need to in order to be able to finish it. And if for some reason you can't finish a particular level because you just haven't figured it out, or you feel like you need more practice in other levels, or you just get too mad at it and you want to go do other levels before you come back to it, then you can always quit that particular level and go right back to the overworld map in order to select a different level. This is particularly noteworthy because the only way you can save your progress is actually by going to the overworld map and then telling it to save the game in one of the various save slots that are available. There is no way to save the game while you're within a specific level. It's only on the overworld map, which means that if you get stuck on a particular point, you can't save scum your way to victory. You have to do it all in one go, basically. This can be particularly irritating when you get to certain levels in the first episodes, and especially once you get to episodes 2 and 3, because a lot of the levels in those are just kind of ridiculous. They have a really nasty habit of throwing a lot of scenarios at you to where you can get stuck in a particular point and not be able to get out of the level without just having to restart the level entirely. This is more true in Secret Agent than it is in Crystal Caves, because in Secret Agent there are pushable barrels that you can use as platforms, and if you push them into the wrong spot, then they get stuck. And if they're stuck and in a position where you can't use them to jump to where you need to jump to, then you've messed up and you need to restart the whole level. I've lost count of the number of levels I've had to restart purely because of the fact that I accidentally pushed a barrel into a position where I couldn't use it to jump to where I needed to jump to. And trust me, whenever that happens, it is very, very irritating. Similarly irritating is when you have destructible blocks that you're supposed to destroy in a specific way, but the only way you could know that is either with a walkthrough or by simple trial and error, so you'll have to restart the level over and over and over again until you get it right. At least it does give you infinite tries at the level, but at the same time, that can be very frustrating when you're sitting there trying to figure something out, and when you finally figure it out, you're like, wait a minute, did I get that because I figured it out, or did I get it because I was lucky? And you really do feel that way a lot of the time. I mean, certain levels in Crystal Caves are dark, and so you're like, wait a minute, if I can't get to the switch, then I guess it's just pure luck as to whether or not I survived this whole thing. And there's also the matter of you better hope that the air machine is not in the path of one of your projectiles, because if your projectile hits the air machine, it's an instant level restart. And that is just really frustrating when you're trying to shoot at a monster, for example, and suddenly one of your projectiles hits the air machine and, well, great, now I gotta restart the whole level again. They do try to spice things up in both games by giving you power-ups and power-downs, so there's something that will increase your damage output in both games. In the case of Secret Agent, it basically makes you fire faster, but in Crystal Caves, it makes your damage actually capable of destroying enemies that normally can't be destroyed, like the walking rocks, for example. There's a power-up that'll make you move faster in Secret Agent. There's a power-up that will reverse the gravity in Crystal Caves. But there's also power-downs, like a half fraction that you can find in Secret Agent that will slow your movement speed down to a half, or a power down that will be a question mark, and if you pick that up, then it reverses your controls. And in Crystal Caves, you also have to worry about green mushrooms, because if you pick one of those up, you just instantly restart the level, which is incredibly irritating. And as far as alternate hazards go in Secret Agent, there are certain enemies that have weak spots that you have to target, and there's also the laser field, which you can deactivate by finding a floppy disk in the level and then using that on a terminal. It's somewhere in the level. But other than that, the main difference is in the objectives, because the core gameplay is almost identical between both games. The jump controls feel almost exactly the same. There's so little of a difference that you barely even notice it at all, even if you play the two back to back. The shooting mechanic is the same, and generally speaking, the platforming itself is going to be extremely comparable between both games. The biggest problem you're going to run into in both games is the frustration factor, because even though you do have infinite lives and you do have 3 health points to work with, there is simply a huge degree of trial and error in the various levels, and in a lot of cases you actually have to take damage. So if you are in a situation where you can't take any more damage, and you get to that point where you have to take damage, well, guess what? You gotta restart the level again. And they also are rather fond of throwing in a lot of segments where if you screw up at all, then you either instantly die or you take a large degree of damage before you're able to rectify your mistake. And even worse, there are a lot of situations that it just outright will not let you finish the level unless you have completed it in a very specific manner. This means that when you really get down to it, both of these games are more frustrating than anything else. They're certainly decent enough DOS platformers, but that's only if you keep in mind the era in which these came out, and you keep in mind that they were released, at least in their first episodes, as shareware games. You could just get the first episodes for free and play through those, and for that particular purpose, they're perfectly fine. The problem comes in when you look at them as full retail packages, because if you combine all 3 episodes, sure, you get plenty of levels to mess around with, but most of them really aren't very good, and the platformers themselves, in terms of raw mechanics, are very basic. And really, when you look back on these fondly, it's more a matter of nostalgia than actual quality of the platformers. That's not to say you should write them off entirely. They had to go somewhere in order to eventually get to something like Realms of Chaos. But neither Crystal Caves nor Secret Agent are paragons of the genre. There were better options out there even in their day. And thus it's pretty hard to justify looking at these unless you are just picking up the shareware releases, or you get them like I did, in which case you got the 3D Realms Anthology or some other pack that they were included in, because that really softens the blow if they're part of a package deal. But on their own, I really can't recommend them other than to DOS platformer enthusiasts. If you're not a DOS platformer enthusiast and you're just looking back on this for nostalgia, then you might want to play the shareware releases, because those are really the best levels in the games. Once you get to episodes 2 and 3 on both of them, yes, they're more levels, but they're just not quite as good as episode 1 levels, particularly in regards to being a lot more trial and error oriented, and thus a lot more frustrating. But if I had to pick one over the other in terms of raw quality, I would say that Crystal Caves is a very slightly better game than Secret Agent is. Thanks for watching.